Were Abraham and Moses historical? A cloud of dust swirls over the ancient city of Ur. Massive ziggurats pierce the blazing Mesopotamian sky, while crowded bazaars hum with merchants and priests worshipping 100 gods. Amidst this polytheistic bustle, a solitary herdsman named Abram hears a voice, a divine summons, to abandon his homeland and journey into the unknown. His story will ripple across time, becoming the foundation of faith for billions. Centuries later, beside the flowing Nile, a baby is pulled from the water and raised within Pharaoh's glittering palace walls. This child, Moses, will rise to challenge an empire, leading his people through plagues, miracles, and fire toward freedom, or so the legend tells. But behind these epic tales lies a troubling question. Did these men ever truly exist? When we dig beneath the layers of tradition, archaeology, and scholarship, the answers are far from simple, and often unsettling. Part 1. Abraham, father of three religions. Abraham stands as one of history's most iconic patriarchs, revered in Judaism, Christianity, and Islam as the spiritual father of nations. According to biblical tradition, he lived during the Middle Bronze Age, roughly 1800 BCE, and began his journey in Ur of the Chaldees, an ancient Sumerian city in Mesopotamia. Archaeologists have uncovered the ruins of Ur, revealing a thriving urban center with monumental ziggurats, extensive trade, and a complex pantheon of gods. It is against this polytheistic backdrop that the Hebrew Bible introduces Abraham as a man called to worship one God, breaking from the religious traditions of his family and culture. The call of Abraham. Genesis tells us that God commanded Abraham, then called Abram, to leave his homeland and go to the land that I will show you. Genesis 12, verse 1. His journey took him north to Haran, in modern-day Turkey, Syria, and eventually south to the land of Canaan. These locations, Ur, Haran, and the various Canaanite city-states, are well documented in the archaeological record. But despite this, no inscriptions, monuments, or contemporaneous records mention Abraham himself. If Abraham truly stood before Pharaoh, why is there no mention of him in Egypt's meticulous archives? This silence is a key reason historians remain skeptical. As archaeologist William G. Dever bluntly states, the patriarchal stories are stories about the origins of Israel written much later, not accounts of verifiable individuals. Why Abraham cannot be verified? The Abraham story contains rich, culturally plausible details: nomadic herding, migration routes, covenants, and kinship customs, all of which align with what scholars know of the Middle Bronze Age. However, this cultural backdrop could just as easily have been reconstructed by later writers drawing on tradition, oral memory, or their own imagination. Israel Finkelstein, co-author of The Bible Unearthed, emphasizes that the Abraham stories are not eyewitness accounts, but literary creations of a much later era. The narratives of the patriarchs are a brilliant product of the late monarchic period, not actual history. Finkelstein and others argue that the Abraham cycle, along with stories of Isaac and Jacob, was compiled in the 7th and 6th centuries BCE, centuries after the events they describe. By then, the authors were crafting a national identity for Israel, projecting their religious ideals into the distant past. Abraham in Egypt. One of the more dramatic episodes in Abraham's story occurs when famine drives him to Egypt, Genesis 12. Fearing that Pharaoh will kill him to take his wife, Sarah, Abraham claims she is his sister. Pharaoh takes her into his house until divine plagues reveal the truth, and Abraham is expelled, enriched with gifts. But Egypt, one of the most thoroughly documented ancient civilizations, offers no mention of Abraham or any such event. If a foreign chieftain had walked into Pharaoh's court and sparked plagues, wouldn't Egypt's meticulous scribes have recorded it? This absence reinforces the view that these stories serve theological purposes, not historical ones. They exist to showcase Abraham's faith and divine favor, not to document actual events. A legendary patriarch? Many scholars see Abraham as a legendary or composite figure, a symbolic ancestor representing the shared roots of Semitic tribes who later identified as Israel. Others suggest that while the stories may contain faint echoes of real migrations or tribal memory, they've been mythologized and reshaped over centuries. The city of Ur, the customs of Canaanite society, and the Egyptian backdrop all lend a sense of realism. But realism is not the same as historicity. As Dever reminds us, these are origin stories. crafted to explain who the Israelites were, where they came from, and why they worshipped one God. The figure of Abraham serves as a bridge between faith and ancestry, regardless of whether he ever walked the earth. Part 2. Moses, the Prince of Egypt. Moses is one of the most celebrated figures in the Bible, a prince of Egypt turned prophet, who, according to tradition, led a miraculous exodus and received the Torah on Mount Sinai. The narrative places him in the Late Bronze Age, roughly 13th, 15th centuries BCE, when Egypt's empire dominated Canaan. But step outside the pages of Scripture and the historical trail disappears. The silence of history. Egypt, a civilization famous for chronicling its rulers, battles, and religious life, offers no trace of Moses or the Exodus. As Dr. Zahi Hawass, former head of Egyptian antiquities, has stated in public lectures, "There is nothing in our archaeology, nothing in the hieroglyphs, nothing in any temple or tomb that supports the story that the Israelites were slaves in Egypt, or that they left in an exodus." Hawass acknowledges that Semitic peoples, such as the Hyksos or migrant laborers, lived in Egypt's eastern delta. But these groups don't match the biblical account of Israelite slavery or a dramatic escape through the desert. There's also no mention of a royal family member named Moses, no evidence of an overseer's murder, and no indication that a Hebrew prophet ever stood before Pharaoh. The missing Exodus. The Exodus describes a mass migration of hundreds of thousands across the Sinai wilderness. Yet archaeologists have found no evidence to support this. No campsites, pottery fragments, weapons, or graves that would mark the passage of such a large group. As Israel Finkelstein writes in the Bible Unearthed, there is no archaeological evidence for the Exodus. Instead, the archaeological record shows that Canaan's population grew gradually through small rural highland settlements. The picture that emerges is not one of outsiders invading from Egypt, but of indigenous people slowly forming a new identity, likely from within Canaanite culture itself. Moses' religion, a Midianite connection. Interestingly, even the Bible hints that Moses' encounter with Yahweh didn't originate with the Israelites. After fleeing Egypt, Moses settles in Midian, in modern-day northwest Arabia, marries into a Midianite family, and meets God at the burning bush on Mount Horeb, a location associated with Midianite religion. Some scholars argue that Yahweh worship may have come from Midian or the Kenites, and was later merged into early Israelite belief. In this view, Moses serves as a cultural bridge between Midianite religion and the later monotheism of Israel. Who wrote the Torah? Tradition claims that Moses wrote the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible, but the text itself undermines this claim. Deuteronomy recounts Moses' death in detail, and Moses the servant of the Lord died there in the land of Moab, and he buried him in a valley, but no man knows his burial place to this day. Deuteronomy 34:5-6. Since then, no prophet has risen in Israel like Moses. Deuteronomy 34:10. How could Moses write about his own death and legacy in the past tense? Modern scholars overwhelmingly agree that the Torah was compiled centuries after the time of Moses, if he lived at all. The documentary hypothesis. The leading scholarly model, the documentary hypothesis, proposes that the Torah is a patchwork of multiple sources, each written at different times. J. Yahwist, 10th, 9th century BCE in Judah. E. Elohist, 9th, 8th century BCE in northern Israel. D. Deuteronomist, 7th century BCE during King Josiah's reforms. P. Priestley, 6th, 5th centuries BCE, during or after the Babylonian exile. These sources, each with their own theology and style, were gradually woven together into a single narrative. The result is not a first-hand account from Moses, but a composite scripture shaped by generations of scribes, editors, and priests. The mythic Moses. Even scholars like Richard Elliott Friedman, who argues that a small historical exodus involving Levites may have occurred, acknowledge that the Moses we know is mostly a symbolic figure. He represents the theological heart of Judaism: law, liberation, and covenant. Whether or not he lived, his story has become one of the most enduring myths in Western religion. Conclusion: legends in the sands of time. Let's be clear, there's no credible evidence that Abraham or Moses ever existed. No records, no artifacts, no contemporary references, just stories, written centuries after the fact, designed to give ancient Israel a sacred origin and divine legitimacy. These are not historical biographies. They are national myths, retroactively crafted to anchor a people's identity and authority in the past. Abraham and Moses are not men we can find in the sands of history. They are legends carved into the human imagination. If you found this exploration thought-provoking, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. What do you think? Let me know in the comments. Until next time, stay curious, stay critical.